The pristine white halls of Galactic Academy stretched endlessly before Jinwoo as he stepped through the shimmering dimensional portal. His dark eyes widened at the sight of floating crystals that provided soft, natural lighting throughout the massive structure. The portal closed behind him with a gentle hum, leaving him alone in a world that no human had ever entered before. Jinwoo clutched his admission tablet tightly, its screen displaying his student credentials in both Earth Standard and Galactic Common. His heart pounded against his ribs as he took in the alien architecture, curves and spirals that seemed to defy gravity, walls that shifted colors based on the time of day, and windows that looked out into the swirling nebula of deep space. The main orientation hall was already filling up with students from across the galaxy. Jinwoo watched as beings of all shapes and sizes filed in through various entrances. Some floated, others walked on multiple legs, and a few seemed to phase in and out of existence as they moved. But he noticed one common thread among them. Most had evolved from herbivorous species. Their bodies were generally slim and graceful, with large, gentle eyes adapted for spotting plants rather than tracking prey. A group of crystalline beings drifted past him, their bodies chiming softly like wind bells. They turned their faceted heads to look at him, their inner lights flickering with what he hoped was curiosity rather than fear. Jinwoo tried to make himself look smaller and less threatening, hunching his shoulders slightly. "You must be the human student," a melodic voice said behind him. Jinwoo turned to find himself facing a tall, willowy being with skin that shimmered like the surface of a soap bubble. "I am Tal, your assigned roommate." Tal's body swayed gently, like a tree in a breeze, as they performed their species' traditional greeting, a complex bow that involved wrapping their long arms around themselves. The movement caused waves of color to ripple across their iridescent skin. "Hello," Jinwoo replied, bowing in return. "I'm Jinwoo. It's nice to meet you." He was relieved that his universal translator was working perfectly, converting his words into the musical language of Tal's people. "Your neural patterns indicate anxiety," Tal observed, their head tilting to one side. "This is unnecessary. The Academy selected you based on your academic achievements and potential for cultural exchange. Your presence here is valid." Jinwoo felt some of his tension ease at these kind words. He smiled warmly at Tal, not yet realizing that his very human teeth, particularly his sharp canines, would soon become a source of considerable discussion among his classmates. A soft chime echoed through the hall, and holographic signs appeared in the air, directing different species to their orientation groups. Jinwoo found himself assigned to the carbon-based bipedal section, along with about 20 other students of varying forms. As they walked together to their designated area, Tal explained some of the Academy's basic features. The walls could become transparent on command, allowing students to study the space around them. The air was automatically adjusted for each species' breathing needs, creating invisible bubbles of perfect atmosphere around every individual. Even gravity could be modified on a person-by-person basis. "The Academy exists in a pocket dimension," Tal explained, their voice full of pride. "This allows us to accommodate students from worlds with vastly different physical laws. Your Earth physics will remain constant within your personal field." Jinwoo nodded, fascinated by everything around him. He watched as a group of gas-based beings floated by, their cloudy forms containing sparks of intelligence and consciousness. Nearby, a student made of living metal was deep in conversation with a being that seemed to be made of pure light. The orientation leader for their group was a tall, elegant creature with 4 arms and skin that looked like flowing water. They began explaining the Academy's rules and systems, but Jinwoo found himself distracted by the growing crowd of students stealing glances at him. He knew he was the first human they had ever seen, but there was something about their looks that made him slightly uneasy. It wasn't until he caught his reflection in a nearby wall that he understood. Among all these herbivorous species, his very human features marked him as something different. His forward-facing eyes, his sturdy build, and especially his omnivorous teeth all subtly signaled predator to their instincts. As the orientation continued, Jinwoo made a mental note to be extra gentle in his movements and to try not to smile too widely. He was here to learn, and to help others learn about humanity. It would take time, but he was determined to show his classmates that being a predatory species didn't make humans dangerous. It was just one part of their complex evolutionary history. The day continued with tours of the living quarters, class halls, and recreation areas. By the time Jinwoo followed Tao to their shared room, his head was spinning with new information, but his heart was full of hope. This was going to be an interesting year for everyone involved, even if no one quite realized just how interesting yet. The trouble started 3 days after Jinwoo's arrival at the Galactic Academy. Until then, he had been careful to eat alone in his room, ordering simple vegetarian meals while he figured out how to handle his dietary needs among his herbivorous classmates. But today, tired of eating alone, he decided to join the other students in the main cafeteria. The cafeteria was a marvel of alien architecture, with tables that floated at different heights to accommodate various species' preferred eating positions. The walls shifted between soft colors that were supposed to aid digestion for most species, and the air was filled with the gentle sounds of different translation devices, helping students communicate as they ate. Jinwoo stood in line at one of the molecular synthesizers, scrolling through the Earth-based menu that had been specially programmed for him. His stomach growled as he saw the familiar dishes from home. After days of salads and fruit, he couldn't resist selecting his favorite comfort food, bulgogi with rice. The synthesizer hummed to life, its blue light scanning the molecular pattern for his chosen meal. Jinwoo watched in fascination as atoms assembled themselves into perfectly cooked meat and fluffy rice, complete with the traditional garnishes he remembered from his mother's cooking. The first sign of trouble came when the rich aroma of cooked meat wafted through the air. The pleasant chatter around him suddenly died down. Tal, who had been standing next to him discussing their morning classes, took an involuntary step backward, their iridescent skin flickering with patches of alarmed yellow. Jinwoo, Tal whispered, their translator barely catching the words. Perhaps you should have ordered this in private. Before Jinwoo could respond, he heard a crystalline chiming sound behind him. Dalme, a being whose body was composed of living crystal formations, had approached with several other students. Her facets were flickering with rapid patterns that indicated distress in her species. Is that processed animal tissue? Dalme asked, her translator making her musical language sound strained. The crystals that formed her body were shifting from their usual calm blue to an agitated red. Jinwoo looked down at his tray, suddenly very aware of the complete silence that had fallen over the cafeteria. Hundreds of large, herbivorous eyes were fixed on his meal. Some students had moved away from their tables, while others seemed frozen in place. Yes, it's beef, Jinwoo explained, trying to keep his voice calm and gentle. It's a traditional dish from my home country, but it's synthesized. No actual animals were harmed in making it. A wave of whispers swept through the cafeteria. Jinwoo could see some students using their personal devices to look up information about Earth cuisine and human dietary habits. Their reactions ranged from fascination to horror. But why would you eat? Delmi's voice trailed off, her crystals chiming in distress. That was once a living creature. Jinwoo carefully set his tray down on a nearby table. Humans are omnivores, he explained. Our bodies evolved to process both plant and animal protein. But we've developed technology to create meat without harming animals. This meat was built molecule by molecule, just like your mineral supplements are synthesized. A tall, gas-based student floated closer, their cloudy forms swirling with curiosity. Your species hunted animals for food. They asked through their translator. Like the apex predators we study in xenobiology. Jinwoo nodded slowly, noticing how several students drifted further away of this confirmation. Yes, but that was thousands of years ago. Modern humans mostly use synthesized protein, and many choose to be vegetarian. We're not hunters anymore. We're scientists, artists, explorers, just like all of you." Tull, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Jinwoo has shown no predatory behavior since arriving. Perhaps we should not judge him based on his dietary needs." Some students nodded in agreement, but others were already leaving the cafeteria. Jinwoo could hear them discussing the implications of having a predator species student among them. His appetite had vanished, replaced by a heavy feeling in his stomach. "I apologize if I've made anyone uncomfortable," he said, reaching for his tray. "I can eat in my room." "No," Tal said firmly, their skin now showing determined patterns of green and gold. "You have as much right to be here as anyone else. The Academy is about learning to understand different species, isn't it?" Dalma's crystals had slowly shifted back to their normal blue. "I admit I am unsettled, but also curious. Would you explain more about human dietary evolution while you eat, from a scientific perspective?" Jinwoo smiled carefully, making sure not to show his teeth. "I'd be happy to," he said, feeling a small spark of hope. As he sat down with Tull and Dalma, a few other curious students drifted closer to listen. The incident in the cafeteria would be discussed in every corner of the academy by evening, but at least some students were willing to learn rather than fear. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Jinwoo took a small bite of his bulgogi, remembering his mother's words about how sharing food could bring people together, even if those people happened to be from different planets. The xenobiology classroom buzzed with nervous energy as Professor Nix prepared for the day's lecture. Jinwoo could feel the tension in the air as he slid into his usual seat near the back of the room. Word of the cafeteria incident had spread quickly through the academy, and now everyone knew there was a meat-eater among them. Professor Nix, a tall being composed of shifting shadows and bioluminescent spots, activated the classroom's holographic system. A detailed three-dimensional image of human internal organs appeared in the center of the room, rotating slowly to show all angles. Jinwoo heard several students make sounds of distress when they saw the teeth and digestive tract clearly displayed. "Today we will study human physiology," Professor Nix announced, their voice carrying a hint of excitement that made their shadow form ripple. "This is a unique opportunity, as we have a human student who can provide first-hand insights into their species' biological adaptations." Jinwoo wanted to sink through his chair as dozens of eyes turned toward him. He noticed several students shifting their seats slightly away from his position. Haenul, a gas-based student who usually floated near him, had drifted to the opposite side of the room, their cloudy form showing signs of agitation. "Humans evolved as pursuit predators," Professor Nix continued, highlighting different parts of the hologram. "Their endurance and problem-solving abilities made them apex predators on their world. Notice these forward-facing eyes, typical of hunting species." The hologram zoomed in on a human head, showing the positioning of the eyes and the structure of human teeth. Several students made clicking sounds of alarm when they saw the canines displayed in detail. "But Professor," a voice called out, "how can we allow a pursuit predator to study among us? Isn't it dangerous?" Jinwoo recognized the voice as belonging to Mei, a student whose species resembled elegant floating flowers. Her petals were trembling slightly as she spoke. Before Professor Nix could respond, another voice joined the discussion. "I find it fascinating." This came from Songyi, a plant-based being whose appendages flowered and changed color with her emotions. Unlike the others, she had actually moved her desk closer to Jinwoo's. "Look at how their bodies evolved to support both plant and animal nutrition. That's an incredible adaptation." Professor Nix's bioluminescent spots pulsed with approval. "Exactly, Songyi. Humans are omnivores, capable of processing both plant and animal matter. This flexibility helped them survive various environmental changes on their home planet." The hologram shifted to show human muscle structure and skeletal system. "Note these adaptations for long-distance running," the professor explained. "Humans can maintain movement for hours, gradually wearing down faster prey through exhaustion. This hunting strategy required significant intelligence and group cooperation. "But they don't hunt anymore, right?" asked another student nervously. Jinwoo finally found his voice. "No, we don't. We developed agriculture thousands of years ago, and now most of our meat is synthesized. Many humans choose to eat only plants." Professor Nix nodded, their shadow form rippling with enthusiasm. Indeed, human evolution didn't stop at their predatory adaptations. They developed complex social structures, advanced technology, and ethical systems that changed how they interact with other species. Song Yai raised one of her flowering appendages. "Professor, isn't it true that many predatory species develop strong protective instincts? I've read that Earth's domesticated predators often guard their human families." "Correct again," Professor Nix said. "Predatory species often evolve complex social bonds and protective behaviors. Humans, in particular, are known for their strong empathy and desire to protect others, even those outside their species." Jinwoo felt a small surge of hope as he saw some students' expressions change from fear to curiosity. Haenul even drifted slightly back in his direction, their gaseous form showing patterns of interest rather than fear. "In fact," Professor Nix continued, "humans have used their predatory instincts in unexpected ways. Their pursuit capabilities made them excellent explorers. Their protective instincts led them to become guardians of endangered species on their planet. Their hunting pattern recognition helps them make scientific breakthroughs." The professor paused, their bioluminescent spots glowing brightly. "The presence of a human student at our academy is not a threat. It's an opportunity to understand how different evolutionary paths can lead to civilized, intelligent beings." As the class continued, Jinwoo noticed more students taking notes and asking questions rather than showing fear. Songyai had started a detailed discussion about human dietary flexibility, while Haenul cautiously asked about human endurance capabilities. By the end of the class, the atmosphere had shifted notably. While some students still seemed wary, others were showing genuine interest. As they filed out of the classroom, Songyai approached Jinwoo. "Would you mind if I asked you more questions about human biology?" she asked, her flowers showing colors of academic excitement. "I'm particularly interested in how your species develop tool use alongside your physical adaptations." Jinwoo smiled, careful to keep his lips closed out of consideration for his classmates' comfort. "I'd be happy to explain," he said, feeling for the first time that maybe, just maybe, being different wasn't going to be an insurmountable barrier after all. The petition appeared on the Academy's neural network 3 weeks after the biology class incident. Jinwoo discovered it when he checked his morning messages. Concerns regarding predatory species integration. Within hours, it had gathered thousands of signatures from students across multiple species. Jinwoo sat on his bed, reading through the carefully worded document that essentially called for his removal from the Academy. The petition cited safety concerns and psychological distress among herbivorous species. Some comments suggested that accepting predatory species went against the Academy's founding principles of peaceful cooperation. Tal, his roommate, had been unusually quiet that morning. They stood near the window, their iridescent skin showing patterns of distress and conflict. "I have not signed it," they said finally, "but many of my kind have." Jinwoo nodded, trying to keep his face neutral. "I understand their fear," he said softly. "Change is difficult." The cafeteria had become an increasingly uncomfortable place. Despite Professor Nix's enlightening biology lesson, many students still moved away when Jinwoo entered a room. He had taken to eating alone in his quarters, ordering only plant-based meals to avoid causing more tension. During his afternoon study session in the library, Songye found him hidden behind stacks of holographic books. Her flowering appendages showed colors of determination and friendship as she sat beside him. "They don't understand," she said, her translator conveying frustration in her musical voice. "My species was once hunted on our homeworld, but we learned to coexist with our predators. They became our greatest protectors." Jinwoo looked up from his studies, curious. "What happened?" "The predators on our world evolved intelligence alongside us," Songya explained, her flowers shifting to thoughtful blues and greens. They realized that protecting us from other threats was more beneficial than hunting us. Now they guard our forests and help maintain our ecosystem's balance. Their conversation was interrupted by a public announcement echoing through the library. An emergency faculty meeting had been called to discuss the petition. Jin Woo's heart sank. The next few days were tense. The Academy's neural network buzzed with debates. Some students posted historical accounts of peaceful cooperation between predator and prey species. Others shared horror stories of worlds where predatory species had destroyed entire civilizations. Professor Nix led the faction supporting Jin Woo's continued enrollment. The purpose of this academy is to broaden understanding between different species, they argued in a public statement. Removing our first human student because of evolutionary history would be a step backward for galactic civilization. But other faculty members disagreed. Our duty is to provide a safe learning environment, countered Professor Lum, a gas giant specialist. The presence of a predatory species creates unavoidable stress for many students. Jin Woo tried to continue his studies despite the controversy. Song Yi and a small group of other students had started sitting with him during classes, forming a quiet support system. Even He Newell, the gas-based student who had initially feared him, began participating in their study groups. My species exists as pure energy, He Newell explained one day. We have no concept of predator or prey. Perhaps that's why I find it easier to move past these biological differences. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a xenocultural studies class, Jin Woo gave a presentation about Earth's conservation movements. He showed how humans had evolved from hunters to become protectors of endangered species, using their predatory instincts to track and save animals from extinction. Humans don't just eat meat anymore, he explained to the class. We use our inherited traits to help other species. Our endurance helps us patrol wildlife preserves. Our pattern recognition helps us spot poachers. Our protective instincts drive us to save even species that once feared us. After his presentation, several students approached him with questions. Some even shared similar stories from their own worlds about the evolution of cooperation between different species. The petition gradually lost momentum. While some students still kept their distance, others began to see the value in learning from different evolutionary perspectives. The faculty eventually voted to maintain Jin Woo's enrollment and to consider applications from other predatory species in the future. Change takes time, Song Yi told him as they watched the sun set over the Academy's dimensional bubble. Her flowers glowed with optimistic colors. But every interaction, every conversation, helps build understanding. Jin Woo smiled, no longer worried about showing his teeth. Maybe that's the real purpose of the Academy, he said. Not just learning facts about each other, but learning to move past our instinctive fears. That evening, a small group gathered in Jin Woo's room. Songye with her glowing flowers, He Newell's swirling gas form, Tall with her shimmering skin, and even Dal Mai, her crystals now showing calm, friendly patterns. Each ate their own culturally appropriate food, sharing stories and learning from their differences. The petition remained in the Academy's archives as a reminder of how far they had come, and how far they still had to go in building true understanding between species. But for Jin Woo and his growing circle of friends, it had become just another step in their journey together. The Advanced Biochemistry Laboratory was usually a place of careful precision and quiet concentration. Students from various species worked on their experiments while containment fields hummed softly, keeping dangerous substances safely isolated. Jin Woo stood at his workstation, carefully analyzing the reaction between two alien compounds through a molecular viewer. The first sign of trouble was so subtle that only Jin Woo's heightened human senses caught it. A slight fluctuation in the containment field's usual hum. He looked up from his work, scanning the room with the instinctive alertness that his ancestors had once used to detect danger on the savannah. Keta, a crystalline being who had been one of the main supporters of the petition to remove Jin Woo, was working with a sample of highly reactive spores from their homeworld. The containment field around their station flickered once, twice, and then failed completely. The spores, suddenly released from their containment, began to spread through the air. Jinwoo's eyes widened as he saw the corrosive effect they had on the nearest equipment. The acidic compounds were eating through metal and plastic alike. Most of the students froze in panic. Their evolutionary instincts, suited for running from predators or hiding among vegetation, didn't prepare them for this kind of crisis. Even the laboratory's automatic safety systems seemed overwhelmed by the unexpected nature of the breach. But Jinwoo's predatory instincts kicked in differently. His mind sharpened. Time seemed to slow, and he found himself analyzing the situation with unusual clarity. This was the same focus his ancestors had used during hunts, now redirected to saving lives. "Everyone out," he shouted, his translator broadcasting in multiple languages. "Cover your breathing organs. Move toward the emergency decontamination chamber." When several students remained frozen, Jinwoo's body moved before his conscious mind could catch up. He ran to the nearest student, a delicate gas-based being whose containment suit was starting to corrode. With the enhanced strength that humans had evolved for persistence hunting, he lifted the student's environmental support unit and carried them toward safety. The spores were spreading faster now, creating a dangerous fog that filled the laboratory. Jinwoo's eyes started to water, but the same endurance that had once let humans chase prey for hours allowed him to keep moving through the pain. He made trip after trip into the contaminated area, using his acute human senses to locate students in distress. His forward-facing eyes, evolved for tracking prey, now helped him navigate through the chaos. His powerful legs, built for running down game, carried him swiftly through the dangerous environment. Kita was still at their workstation, their crystalline forms starting to show signs of corrosion from the spores. When Jinwoo reached them, they tried to back away, still instinctively afraid of the predatory human. "Trust me," Jinwoo said firmly, reaching out with hands that could have been used for hunting but were now offered in help. After a moment's hesitation, Kita allowed Jinwoo to guide them to safety. The emergency response team arrived to find most students already evacuated to the decontamination chamber. Jinwoo stood at the chamber's entrance, counting students and checking for injuries, his protective instincts now fully engaged in ensuring everyone's safety. In the medical bay later, as students were being treated for exposure to the spores, Kita approached Jinwoo. Their crystalline form had been restored to its usual clarity, though they still moved stiffly. "Perhaps we were wrong about humans," they said quietly. "We saw only the predator, not the protector." Jinwoo, being treated for minor chemical burns on his arms, nodded carefully. "Humans evolved as predators, yes," he replied. "But we also evolved to protect our group, to work together in crisis. Those instincts are just as much a part of us as our ability to hunt." Word of the incident spread quickly through the academy. Students who had avoided Jinwoo now found themselves reevaluating their assumptions. The same traits they had feared, his strength, his quick reactions, his predatory focus, had proved to be invaluable in a crisis. Professor Nix called a special assembly to discuss the incident. "Today we saw how evolutionary traits can serve different purposes," they announced. "What makes a species successful is not just their physical capabilities, but how they choose to use them." In the following days, Jinwoo noticed a marked change in how others treated him. Students who had signed the petition now nodded respectfully when they passed him in the halls. Some even started asking him to explain human protective instincts, curious about how a predatory species had developed such strong protective behaviors. The laboratory accident became a turning point in the Academy's understanding of human nature. It showed that the same traits that had once made humans fearsome hunters now made them valuable protectors. The incident was later added to the Academy's teaching curriculum as an example of how evolutionary traits could be adapted for different purposes in an advanced civilization. At the end of that eventful week, Kita joined Jinwoo's study group for the first time. As they sat together, discussing the chemical properties of various spores, now safely contained, Jinwoo realized that sometimes it took a crisis to break down the barriers of fear and misunderstanding. The Grand Lecture Hall of Galactic Academy buzzed with anticipation as students from all species filed in for the first-ever Earth Culture Symposium. Song Yai had spent weeks organizing the event, her flowering appendages showing a rainbow of excited colors as she checked the holographic projectors one last time. Jinwoo stood backstage, reviewing his presentation notes. After the laboratory incident, interest in human culture had grown significantly. Students who once avoided him now sent messages daily, asking questions about Earth and its inhabitants. "Ready?" Songya asked, her translator conveying both excitement and support. "There are more attendees than we expected. Even Professor Lum came, and they were one of the strongest critics of having predatory species at the Academy." Jinwoo took a deep breath and nodded. The symposium began with Song Yi's introduction, her flowers glowing with scholarly enthusiasm as she explained the importance of understanding different evolutionary paths. When Jinwoo stepped onto the stage, the holographic systems activated, filling the air with three-dimensional images of Earth's ecosystems. The audience gasped as they watched scenes of forests, oceans, and grasslands where predator and prey species coexisted in delicate balance. "This is Earth," Jinwoo began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "A world where life evolved along many different paths, including both predator and prey species. Humans didn't choose to be omnivores. Evolution shaped us based on what helped our ancestors survive." The holovids showed early human history, from hunter-gatherer societies to the development of agriculture. Jinwoo explained how humans had gradually changed their relationship with other species, moving from pure survival to ethical consideration of other life forms. "But the most important thing we evolved wasn't our ability to hunt," he continued, as the images shifted to show modern Earth. "It was our capacity for empathy, our ability to understand and care about other species' experiences." The audience watched in fascination as the holovids demonstrated Earth's conservation efforts. They saw humans using their tracking abilities to protect endangered species, their endurance to patrol wildlife preserves, and their problem-solving skills to develop new ways of producing food without harming animals. "Today, most humans choose to eat synthesized protein," Jinwoo explained, showing the molecular construction process. "We still have our omnivorous biology, but we've used our technology to reduce suffering. Many humans choose to eat only plant-based foods." Keita, sitting in the front row, raised their crystalline form in a gesture of questioning. "But why continue to eat meat at all, even synthesized versions?" Jinwoo appreciated the directness of the question. "Our bodies evolved to process both plant and animal proteins efficiently. While we can survive on plants alone, some humans find that their health is better maintained with a mixed diet. The key is that we found a way to satisfy these needs without causing harm." The presentation moved on to show Earth's wildlife rehabilitation centers, where humans used their predatory pattern recognition to diagnose injured animals and their precise hand control to perform delicate medical procedures. "Having evolved as predators gave us certain advantages," Jinwoo said. "But how we use those abilities is a choice. We chose to become protectors instead of remaining hunters." Professor Nix, their shadow form showing patterns of academic interest, asked about human emotional connections to other species. Jinwoo responded by showing images of human families with their companion animals, predator and prey species living together in harmony. "Earth's history taught us something important," Jinwoo explained. "Evolution shapes what we are capable of, but culture determines what we choose to do with those capabilities." The symposium continued with interactive demonstrations. Jinwoo showed how human medical technology had been adapted to help other species, how human protective instincts had led to the development of environmental preservation techniques, and how human problem-solving abilities were being used to restore damaged ecosystems. As the event drew to a close, students crowded around Jinwoo with questions. Many were particularly interested in Earth's companion animals, The concept of predator species like cats and dogs living peacefully with humans seemed to offer hope for broader interspecies cooperation. Your presentation has given us much to think about, Professor Lum admitted, their gaseous form showing patterns of thoughtful reconsideration. Perhaps we have been too quick to judge species by their evolutionary history rather than their chosen path. Song Yi's closing remarks summed up the symposium's impact. Understanding each other's origins helps us appreciate how far we've all come. Every species here has evolved beyond their original survival mechanisms to become something more. Later that evening, Jinwoo found himself surrounded by a diverse group of students in the Academy's social area. They shared meals, some synthesized, some photosynthesized, some mineralized, while discussing the possibilities for future cultural exchange events. The success of the Earth Culture Symposium marked a new chapter in the Academy's approach to species diversity. It showed that understanding each other's evolutionary history, while important, was less crucial than recognizing how different species had grown beyond their origins. The end-of-term ceremony at Galactic Academy filled the Grand Assembly Hall with a rainbow of different species. The dimensional space above the gathered students sparkled with stars from 1,000 home systems, each one representing a world that had sent its brightest minds to study among the stars. Jinwoo sat among his fellow students, no longer separated by fear or misunderstanding. The past term had brought changes that no one had expected when the first human student arrived at the Academy. What had started as an experiment in species integration had become a revolution in interstellar education. The Academy's chancellor, a being of pure energy contained within an elegant crystalline form, rose to address the gathering. Their voice resonated through everyone's universal translators, carrying equal measures of pride and purpose. This term has taught us more than any textbook could convey, the Chancellor began. We learned that true intelligence isn't measured by what evolution has made us, but by what we choose to become. Jinwoo felt a warm glow of pride as the Chancellor announced the Academy's new diversity initiative. Starting next term, students from 10 more predatory species would be admitted. The list included silicon-based hunters from the Crab Nebula, atmospheric predators from gas giant worlds, and even a species of sentient plant that had evolved from carnivorous roots. Around him, Jinwoo could see his fellow students' reactions. Some showed excitement through colorful displays of light or energy, others through chemical signatures or crystalline formations. Even those who had once feared him now demonstrated enthusiasm for the coming changes. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the Academy's grand dining hall. The space had been redesigned to accommodate all dietary needs, with separate synthesis stations for different biological requirements. Jinwoo found himself sharing a table with an unlikely group of friends. Tal's iridescent skin shimmered with patterns of joy as they consumed mineral supplements. Song Yi's flowering appendages glowed with warm colors while she photosynthesized her meal. Dalmei's crystalline form sparkled as she absorbed energy directly from a small fusion source. And Jinwoo enjoyed a bowl of synthesized bibimbap, no longer feeling the need to hide his omnivorous nature. "I remember when I first saw you eat meat," Dalmei chimed musically, her crystals forming patterns of amusement. "I was so shocked. Now I find myself curious about how different species sustain themselves." "Everything has changed," Song Yi agreed, her flowers pulsing with happy colors. "Next term, we're starting a xenogastronomy club to study different species' dietary adaptations. Would you help us organize it, Jinwoo?" Jinwoo nodded, touched by how far they'd come from those first tense days. "I'd be honored," he said. "Maybe we could even include information about how different species evolved their eating habits." Tal's skin rippled with thoughtful patterns. "You've changed how we see the galaxy," they admitted. "There's so much more to learn from each other than we realized. Our differences don't have to divide us. They can make us stronger together." The celebration continued into the evening, with students from different species mixing freely, sharing stories and dreams. A group of gas-based beings performed a traditional dance, their cloudy forms weaving complex patterns in the air. Crystalline students created harmonic resonances that filled the hall with beautiful music. Professor Nix drifted by their table, their shadow form showing patterns of satisfaction. Your success here has opened new possibilities for galactic education, they told Jinwoo. Next term, we're adding a course on evolutionary adaptation and cultural development. Jinwoo looked around at his friends. Herbivores, photosynthetics, mineral-based life forms, all sharing space and ideas without fear. He smiled, no longer worried about showing his teeth. It wasn't out of shame that he had once hidden them, but now it wasn't necessary to hide anything at all. As the celebration wound down, Jinwoo received messages from the next term's incoming predatory species students, asking for advice and guidance. He realized that his experience would help smooth the path for others, making the Academy truly universal in its acceptance of different evolutionary paths. To New Horizons, Tull proposed, raising their mineral supplement in a traditional gesture of their people. To New Horizons, everyone echoed in their own ways, through light, sound, chemical signals, and words. As the artificial sun set over the Academy's dimensional bubble, Jinwoo felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had come here as an experiment, the first human in a school of herbivores. He would leave as proof that understanding could overcome instinct, that evolution could give way to enlightenment, and that the galaxy was big enough for all kinds of intelligence to flourish together. The end-of-term celebration marked not just the completion of classes, but the beginning of a new era in galactic education. The stars above the Academy seemed to shine brighter, as if approving of the changes below, promising new discoveries and friendships in the terms to come.